A Supreme Court ruling kicked over the first domino, and 7 major gun rules changed right after it. The scary part I ask this: a lot of gun owners still think the law works the old way, and that mistake can wreck your rights, your money, and your future. Quick question before we continue. Are you subscribed? Because this channel is built for people who do not want to learn gun law the hard way. Hit that button right now, because what I'm about to break down could keep you from making a very expensive mistake. Here's what just happened. When most people hear Supreme Court gun case, they think one case changed one rule. That is not what happened here. One big ruling started the chain reaction, and then later rulings made the picture even clearer. So if you only watched the headline and moved on, you probably missed the part that actually affects your life. First change, the court blew up the old special reason carry permit system in states like New York. Before this, some states could say, sure, you can own a handgun, but if you want to carry it in public, you need to prove you have a special need beyond normal self-defense. In plain English, that meant regular people could get denied unless they convinced an official they faced unusual danger. The court said, no. If caring for self-defense is the issue, the government cannot make you prove you are more special than everyone else. Let me explain why this matters. Most people think the decision created a free-for-all. It did not. The court did not say every permit rule is gone. It said states cannot use open-ended discretion and vague standards to block ordinary law-abiding adults from carrying. That is a huge difference. Second change, public carry is not just a home right issue anymore. The court made it clear that the right to bear arms includes carrying in public for self-defense. That sounds simple, but it changed the whole argument. Before, some states acted like your rights basically stopped at your front door. After that ruling, that position got much harder to defend. Now this is where it gets interesting. A lot of people heard that and thought, great, I can carry anywhere now. No, this is what most people get wrong. And the court did not erase permits. It did not erase location limits. It did not erase every training rule or background check. What it did was force governments to justify those rules in a very different way. Third change, the legal test itself changed. This is the part nobody talks about, and it may be the biggest shift of all. For years, courts often asked whether a gun law served public safety enough to justify the burden. The Supreme Court said that is not the test. Instead, courts now ask whether the regulation fits the text of the Second Amendment and the nation as historical tradition of firearm regulation. That sounds technical, so let me say it in normal English. Judges are now supposed to compare modern gun laws to the kinds of gun regulations America has historically accepted, not just decide what feels reasonable today. That one move changed lawsuits across the country overnight. Why? Because suddenly, old assumptions were gone. Laws that had survived for years were challenged again. Some fell, some survived. Some are still being fought over right now. So if you are relying on advice from your buddy or a gun forum post from 3 years ago, you could be following rules that no longer work the same way. Here's a real-world example. Imagine you live in a state that issues permits based on clear rules like age, training, fingerprints, and background checks. You pass those rules, and you get the permit. That system can still stand. But imagine a state official says, I just don't think your reason is good enough. That old game took a major hit. That is the difference between objective rules and subjective power. But wait, there's something even more important. Just because the Supreme Court changed the test does not mean your local cop, your county clerk, or even a lower court judge will explain it the same way. That is where people get burned. They hear gun owners won, and then they stop reading. Then they travel across state lines, walk into the wrong place, or trust an outdated permit chart online. And that is how a legal win turns into a criminal charge. If you're finding this helpful, imagine what you'll learn in my next video about the exact words that can protect you when police ask about your firearm during a traffic stop. Subscribe now so you don't miss it, because that one conversation can change everything. Now let's get to change number 4, because this is where panic and confusion really exploded. The court said there are still places where gun bans can be lawful, often called sensitive places. Think schools or government buildings. But here's the crazy part. The court also warned that states cannot just call every crowded place sensitive and wipe out the right that way. In other words, the government does not get to turn an entire city into a no-carry zone just by saying lots of people are there. That changed the fight over places like parks, transit, entertainment areas, and long lists of restricted zones. Some states responded by creating huge maps of banned locations. Then the lawsuits started. So the law today is not as simple as you can carry anywhere or you can't carry anywhere. The real answer is this. Broad location bans now face much harder challenges, but many of them still exist while courts sort it out. Here's a hypothetical example to explain this. Let's say you have a valid permit. You stop for gas, then you go into a government office, then you grab dinner, then you walk through a restricted event area. Your legal status may change several times in one afternoon, depending on the exact state, the exact property, and the exact rule being enforced that day. That is why knowing the headline is not enough. You need the details. Fifth change, the Supreme Court later made clear that not every gun restriction dies under the new test. This shocked a lot of people. In the Rahimi case, the court upheld the federal rule that can disarm a person who is under a qualifying domestic violence restraining order. That matters, because many people assumed the earlier ruling meant almost every firearm restriction was now doomed. The court said not so fast. Let me break this down for you. The court basically said history does not require a modern law to be an exact copy of an old law. It does not have to be a perfect twin. If the principle is similar, and the government is dealing with a person found by a court to pose a real threat, temporary disarmament can still fit the Constitution. That is a huge clarification. Now, quick legal note. This is educational information, not legal advice. Always consult an attorney for your specific situation. Why should you care about that if you are not in that situation? Because it tells you something bigger. The Supreme Court is not saying all gun laws fall. It is saying the government has to justify them under the right framework. Some laws will fail. Some laws will survive. And the difference may come down to tiny facts most people never bother to check. Here's what most people miss. They hear one pro-gun ruling and assume every restriction is fake. Or they hear one anti-gun headline and assume every right is gone. Both reactions are wrong. The truth is messier, and messy law is dangerous because it tricks normal people into false confidence. Have you ever wondered why two people can read the same headline and walk away believing the exact opposite thing? This is why. One person hears rights expanded. The other hears some restrictions upheld. Both are true in part. But if you carry, transport, buy, build, or modify firearms, partial truth is not good enough. Hey, 73% of people watching right now aren't subscribed. Don't be part of that group. Join the gun owners who come here to understand what the law actually says, not what social media claims it says. Click subscribe and stay ahead of the next change before it lands on your doorstep. Now let's talk about change number 6, and this one made national news for a minute, then almost everybody moved on. The Supreme Court struck down the federal bump stock ban that had been created through the ATF's rule. The court said a bump stock does not fit the current federal definition of a machine gun. Read that carefully. The court did not say bump stocks are wise. It did not say every state has to allow them. It said the federal agency went beyond the statute Congress actually wrote. That is a massive lesson for gun owners. Sometimes the question is not whether something is dangerous. Sometimes the question is whether the government used the right legal authority. Those are not the same thing. So if you heard the Supreme Court legalized bump stocks everywhere, that is wrong. Some state laws may still ban them. The ruling was about the federal definition and the federal rule. Here's why this matters to you even if you never plan to own one. It shows that wording matters. A single phrase in a statute can decide whether a device is legal, illegal, regulated, or in court for years. That means you cannot trust summaries that skip the exact issue. One word can be the whole fight. Seventh change, and this is the part almost nobody noticed, the court also allowed the federal government to keep regulating many ghost gun kits and unfinished frames or receivers under the ATF rule. In plain English, if a kit can be readily turned into a working firearm, the government can often treat it like a firearm for purposes like serial numbers, records, licensing, and background checks. When I found out how many gun owners were still repeating the old, "it's just parts, so none of the rules apply" line, I couldn't believe it. That claim became much riskier after that decision. And again, notice the pattern. One side says the court is rolling back gun control. The other side says the court is expanding regulation. The truth is both things happened in different areas. So let's put the 7 changes together in one clean list you can actually remember. 1, states cannot demand a special need from ordinary people for public carry the way New York did. 2, carrying in public for self-defense is protected conduct. 3, courts now judge gun laws mainly through text, history, and tradition, not simple balancing tests. 4, true sensitive places can still be restricted, but giant blanket no-carry zones are harder to defend. 5, people under qualifying domestic violence restraining orders can still be temporarily disarmed. 6, bump stocks are not machine guns under the current federal statute as interpreted by the court. 7, many ghost gun kits and unfinished receivers can still be regulated like firearms under federal law. And here's the mistake that ties all 7 together. People hear one of those points and ignore the other 6. That is how they end up carrying lawfully in one place and unlawfully in another, buying something federally legal but state illegal, or assuming a court case erased every rule on the books. It did not. This information could change again faster than most people think. Subscribe now, because the next video breaks down exactly what you should check before carrying, transporting, or buying anything under these changing rules. Laws move fast, courts move weird, and waiting until after a traffic stop is the worst time to learn. So what is the big takeaway? The Supreme Court did not simply expand gun rights or uphold gun control. It redrew the map. Some old restrictions fell, some stayed alive, some got much harder to enforce. And if you still think the law works the way it did a few years ago, you are gambling with your freedom.